No one wants a weak Omega, they said, until the Omega fed the Alpha King's orphan pup. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's return to Emily Carter. Winter pressed down on North Vale like a heavy blanket of ice, the kind that creaked beneath your boots and stole the breath from your lungs in the first 5 seconds outdoors. And Emily felt it more than most, because she stood at the very edge of the packed grounds where warmth and kindness thinned out fast. An Omega with no rank to shield her, no mate to speak for her, no family name anyone bothered to remember. Just a slim coat pulled tight and hands already numb though the sun had barely cleared the trees. And when the others spoke about her, they never used her name. They said weak Omega, burden Omega, waste of resources, words that followed her like frostbite, invisible at first and painful once you realized the damage was done. And when the morning ration line formed, she knew better than to step forward too soon, because the stronger wolves filled their bowls first, laughing and talking about hunts and feasts, while she waited, counting heartbeats, telling herself she didn't need much. She never did. A few ounces of stew, a heel of bread, something warm enough to quiet the ache in her stomach. But the ladle stopped before it reached her, and someone muttered that there wasn't enough today. That winter was hard on everyone. That priorities mattered. And the sentence ended where it always did, with a glance that said she wasn't one. And Emily nodded, because nodding was easier than arguing, and pride didn't keep you warm anyway. So she stepped back, cheeks burning, though the air was well below freezing, and turned toward the trees where the pack's noise faded into wind and pine, where she could breathe without being watched. And that was when she heard it, a thin sound, barely more than a whimper, coming from behind a fallen log dusted with snow, a sound too small to belong to an adult wolf. And when she knelt, she saw a pup no bigger than a loaf of bread, ribs showing, eyes too bright for such a tiny body, alone in a world that had already decided it didn't have room. And Emily didn't think about what she'd been told 5 minutes earlier or the empty bowl still warming her hands. She just broke off the last piece of bread she had, held it out slowly, felt the pup's breath flutter against her fingers, and in that quiet space between hunger and hope she made a choice no one else saw yet, the kind of choice that never looks powerful until it changes everything. Emily stayed crouched in the cold long after the pup finished eating, her knees aching against the frozen ground, her fingers tingling as feeling slowly returned. And when the little wolf finally settled, curling closer to the warmth of her coat, something in her chest loosened in a way she had not felt in years, because for once she was not invisible, not to this small living thing that trusted her without knowing her name or her rank. And she brushed snow from its fur with careful strokes, whispering nonsense words the way her mother once had when storms rattled the windows. Words meant more to soothe than to explain, and the forest around them seemed to listen, branches creaking softly as the wind shifted, carrying the distant voices of the pack behind her, voices that grew louder by the minute, because winter made everyone restless and scarcity sharpened tempers fast. And it did not take long before footsteps crunched through the snow, heavy and careless, stopping just a few yards away. And Emily did not have to look up to know what was coming. She could hear it in the tone of their breathing, in the impatience of wolves who had never learned what it meant to go without. And a voice scoffed, asking what she thought she was doing wasting food on a runt, pointing out that weak pups did not survive winter anyway, that nature made those choices for a reason. And Emily felt her shoulders stiffen as she rose slowly, placing herself between the speaker and the pup without thinking, her body reacting before fear could catch up, because something about the way the pup leaned into her legs made stepping aside impossible. And she answered quietly that it was hungry, that she had enough to share, even though that was not true anymore. And the answer was met with laughter, the kind that carried no humor, only boredom. And someone muttered that this was why Omegas like her were a problem, always thinking with their hearts instead of their heads. And Emily swallowed, tasting the sharp edge of old words she had heard her entire life. But she did not move, did not argue, did not beg. She simply stood there, hands clenched at her sides, eyes steady despite the cold stinging them. and for a moment the world narrowed to the space between her boots and the pup's small, trembling body, until another sound drifted through the trees, softer than the others, a presence rather than a noise, the kind that made the air feel heavier without announcing itself. And somewhere beyond the line of sight, deeper in the forest, where the light barely touched the ground, a figure paused, watching without stepping forward, his breath visible in slow, controlled clouds, his attention fixed not on the wolves arguing over resources, but on the Omega who refused to step away. And he saw the way she did not raise her voice, did not posture, did not bare teeth or demand respect. He saw only a quiet resolve, the kind that came from loss rather than strength. And when the pup lifted its head and made a small sound, instinctively pressing closer to her legs, something old and sharp stirred in the observer's chest, a recognition he had not expected, because the scent that drifted faintly on the air was unmistakable, young and royal, threaded with a bond that should never have been broken. And still he did not intervene, not yet, choosing instead to let the moment unfold, because fate, he had learned, revealed itself best when people believed they were alone. The wolves eventually drifted away, drawn back toward the pack grounds by hunger and habit, their laughter fading into the trees until only the wind remained. And Emily exhaled slowly, not realizing she had been holding her breath the entire time, her legs trembling now that the danger had passed, and she knelt again beside the pup, pressing her forehead briefly to her knees as if grounding herself, because standing her ground had cost her more energy than she wanted to admit. And when she looked up, the pup was watching her with wide eyes, its tail giving a tentative thump against the snow, and she managed a small smile, murmuring that it was all right now, though she was not sure if she meant for the pup or for herself, and she coaxed it closer, tucking it beneath her coat as best she could, feeling its tiny heartbeat flutter against her ribs, fast but steady. And she realized then that leaving it alone out here was no longer an option, because night would fall in a few hours and the temperature would drop another 10 degrees. And no matter what the pack said about weak omegas or wasted resources, she would not walk away from something that trusted her this completely. So she started toward the edge of the forest where an old storage shed leaned crookedly against a stand of trees, a place she had slept more than once when the pack house felt too crowded, too loud with unspoken judgments. And with each step the pup grew heavier, not in weight, but in responsibility, because she could already hear tomorrow's whispers forming, could already imagine the looks when she returned, empty-handed, carrying a pup no one claimed. And yet beneath that familiar dread was something else, a quiet certainty she could not explain, a feeling that this small act mattered more than anything she had been denied, and she did not notice the shift in the air until it brushed against her senses like a change in pressure before a storm, subtle but undeniable, and she paused, glancing back once, catching only the impression of movement far behind her, tall and still among the shadows, though when she blinked the forest looked empty again, and she shook her head, blaming exhaustion, because hunger and cold played tricks on the mind, and she pushed open the warped door of the shed, settling onto a pile of old blankets she had stashed there weeks ago, wrapping the pup carefully and sharing her remaining body heat, whispering stories she half remembered, stories about warm hearths and safe places, about winters that always ended eventually. And as the pup drifted into sleep, its breathing evening out, Emily allowed herself to rest her eyes. For just a moment, unaware that beyond the tree line, the observer she had sensed earlier stood very still, his gaze fixed on the faint light spilling from the shed's cracks, his jaw set as memory and reality collided, because he had searched for weeks with no trace, had followed broken scents and false trails through snow and storm, and now here, in the care of a rejected Omega, was the proof he had almost stopped hoping for. And as he listened to the low, gentle cadence of her voice through the wood, he felt something inside him shift, something old and guarded giving way to a fierce, unfamiliar gratitude, because she did not know who the pup was, did not know what he represented, and still she chose him. And for the first time since the loss that had hardened his rule, Alpha King Rowan Blackwood did not step forward as a king, but as a father, deciding that this Omega, dismissed by everyone else, would never face the coming dawn alone. Morning crept in slowly, pale and hesitant, the kind of winter dawn that did not warm so much as reveal. and Emily woke with a stiff neck and numb fingers. Realizing she had slept curled around the pup like a shield, her coat half pulled over them both. And when she shifted carefully, the pup stirred, letting out a soft sound that made her chest tighten with relief, because it was still warm, still breathing evenly, still here. And she whispered good morning as if it could understand, rubbing its back to coax circulation, then reached for the small tin cup she kept tucked behind a crate, filling it with snow and waiting patiently as it melted from the heat of her hands, offering a few careful drops to the pup once it was liquid, watching as its tiny tongue lapped clumsily, splashing more than it drank, and she laughed under her breath, the sound unfamiliar in her own ears, because it had been a long time since anything this small had depended on her, and longer still since she had let herself enjoy it. And as the light strengthened, she assessed what little she had left, a strip of dried meat, hardly enough for herself, but she tore it into pieces anyway, soaking them in the water to soften them before offering them to the pup. One by one, counting each bite, measuring out care the way she had learned to measure hunger, slowly, thoughtfully, without waste. And when the pup finished, it curled back against her, satisfied for now, and Emily leaned her head against the wall, closing her eyes briefly, feeling both exhaustion and a strange sense of purpose settle into her bones, because she knew that when she returned to the pack with this pup, questions would follow, and judgment, and consequences she could not predict, but she also knew she would not leave it behind, not after choosing it once already. And as if the thought summoned him, the pressure in the air shifted again, heavier than before, deliberate, and she froze, every instinct lighting up at once, not with fear exactly but awareness. And when the shed door creaked open, she scrambled to her feet, instinctively placing herself between the opening and the pup, heart hammering as a tall figure filled the doorway, his presence commanding without a word, broad shoulders framed by winter light, eyes sharp and searching, and for a split second she thought she might be in trouble, that perhaps she had broken some rule she did not know. But then his gaze dropped past her to the bundle of blankets at her feet, and something in his expression changed, hard lines easing just enough to reveal something raw beneath. And he spoke her name softly, as if tasting it, surprising her because no one important ever bothered to learn it. And he asked if the pup had eaten, if it was warm, if it was safe, questions layered with restraint, and Emily nodded, answering simply that she had fed it what she could, that it had slept through the night, that she would not let anything happen to it, even now not asking who he was or why he cared so deeply, because some truths announced themselves without explanation. And when he knelt, careful not to crowd her, extending a hand so the pup could scent him, the reaction was immediate, the pup stirring and pressing toward him with a familiarity that made Emily's breath catch, and the man closed his eyes briefly, relief washing over his features like a tide, before he looked back at her with something like awe, telling her quietly that she had done more than she knew, that kindness like hers was rare in times like these. And when she tried to deflect the praise, shrugging that anyone would have done the same, his gaze held hers, steady and certain, and he replied that they had not, and that was the difference. And though he still did not name himself, the weight of his presence lingered long after he rose, promising that what began here would not end the way she feared. And as he stepped back into the cold morning, leaving her with the pup and a heart full of questions, Emily realized that the world had shifted just a little around her, and for the first time the change did not feel like something to endure, but something to face. Emily waited until the man was gone before she realized how much her hands were shaking, the cold finally catching up now that the tension had passed, and she pressed her palms together, steadying herself as the pup wriggled closer, clearly more interested in warmth than mysteries, and she smiled despite herself, because whatever that encounter meant, it had not felt like a threat. And yet by midday she knew there would be no avoiding the pack any longer, because supplies ran out whether you hid or not, and the pup would need more than scraps if it was going to survive the week. So she wrapped it securely against her chest and started back toward the main grounds, every step heavier than the last, not from weight, but from the certainty that eyes would follow her the moment she emerged from the trees. And they did, conversations stalling as heads turned, expressions shifting from curiosity to disbelief, because she was not supposed to bring problems back with her. She was supposed to disappear quietly, and someone laughed, asking if she planned to adopt every stray Winter threw at them. And another voice chimed in that the pack barely fed its own, let alone some unknown pup, and Emily felt the familiar heat of embarrassment crawl up her neck, but she did not lower her gaze this time. She answered that the pup was alone, that it would not last the night without help, that she would take responsibility for it. Every word chosen carefully, because she knew how easily tone could be twisted into defiance, and the murmurs grew sharper, a few wolves stepping closer, not aggressive but dismissive, pointing out that rules existed for a reason, that resources had to be protected, that sentiment did not fill empty bowls, and Emily nodded, acknowledging truths she had lived with her whole life, then said quietly that she had never asked for more than her share, that she would work, that she would give up her place in line if needed, but she would not abandon the pup, and that was when the mood shifted, because sacrifice was one thing in theory and another when spoken aloud by someone no one expected to offer it. And for a moment no one knew how to respond, until the familiar weight settled over the clearing again, subtle but commanding, silencing arguments without a raised voice, and the man from the forest stepped into view at last, no longer hidden by branches or distance, his presence enough to draw instinctive stillness from the crowd, and even those who did not recognize him straightened, sensing authority the way wolves always did. And he looked at Emily first, not the pack, his gaze steady and assessing, then at the pup nestled against her. And when he spoke his words were calm, measured, asking who had turned away a child in winter, who had decided compassion was a luxury, and no one answered, because the question was not really meant for them. And he continued, saying that strength was not measured only by what you took, but by what you protected, that a pack that forgot this would not last long no matter how full its stores, and Emily's breath caught, because she had heard elders speak like this in stories, but never in her defense. And finally he turned to her, telling her she had done enough for today, that arrangements would be made, that the pup would be fed and sheltered, and though he still did not claim his title, the way others stepped aside told her everything she needed to know, and as she was guided away, the pup safe in her arms, Emily felt something unfamiliar settle into her spine, not pride exactly, but the quiet realization that for once, the world had bent instead of breaking her, and whatever consequences lay ahead, they would not erase what she had already proven, to herself most of all. The rest of the day moved differently after that, as if the pack itself had shifted on its axis, and Emily felt it in the way eyes followed her now with uncertainty instead of dismissal, in the way conversations lowered when she passed, not out of kindness but confusion, because nothing unsettled a hierarchy faster than an Omega who did not break when expected to, and she kept her head down, focused on the pup, who had been settled near the central hearth under the watch of two older pack members tasked with warming and feeding it, though Emily never strayed far, hovering close enough to step in if needed, her body still angled protectively without conscious thought, and the man who had intervened remained nearby as well, speaking quietly with elders, his voice calm but impossible to ignore, and though no announcement was made, the tension that rippled through the clearing said enough, because power did not always need a name to be recognized, and when evening approached he finally sought her out again, finding her where she sat on a low bench, fingers combing gently through the pup's fur, murmuring to it while it gnawed clumsily on a softened scrap of food, and he asked how she was holding up, the question simple but sincere, and she answered honestly that she was tired but fine, adding after a pause that she had done only what felt right, and he studied her for a long moment, as if weighing something far heavier than words, then told her that the pack would not trouble her tonight, that she would be given a proper place to rest, and when she hesitated, glancing toward the others, he added quietly that this was not charity, it was acknowledgement, and something in his tone made refusal feel unnecessary, and as they walked a short distance away from the noise, the air between them filled with questions Emily did not yet dare to ask, until he stopped beneath the bare branches of an old oak and finally gave her a piece of the truth, not all of it, but enough, telling her that the pup was not lost by accident, that it belonged to someone who had searched for it through storm and snow, and that her choice to protect it had reached further than she could see. And Emily listened, heart pounding, because she had suspected something from the moment the pup responded to him, but hearing it spoken aloud made the weight of it real, and she asked then, quietly, why he had waited, why he had watched instead of stepping in sooner, and his answer surprised her, because he said he needed to know who would choose the pup without knowing its worth, who would feed it without expecting reward, and Emily laughed softly at that, shaking her head, saying she had not thought of it as a test, only a necessity, and he nodded, saying that was exactly why it mattered, and when he finally told her his name, Rowan Blackwood, the forest itself seemed to still, the title implied settling over the ground like frost, and Emily inhaled sharply, recognition dawning too late to hide, but he did not let her bow or retreat, holding up a hand, telling her that tonight he stood before her not as a ruler demanding submission, but as a father offering thanks, and the simplicity of that statement undid something inside her, because gratitude from a king carried weight, but gratitude from a parent carried truth. And she found herself answering that she would have done the same for any child, royal or not, and Rowan smiled then, a brief, genuine expression that transformed his stern features, and he replied that this was precisely why the future would need her more than it knew. And as the moon rose, casting pale light over the pack, Emily realized that the line between what she had been and what she was becoming had blurred beyond recognition, and though uncertainty still waited ahead, it no longer felt like a threat, but an opening, one shaped by a simple act of kindness that could not be taken back. The night deepened into a quiet that felt deliberate, the pack subdued not by command but by awareness, and Emily noticed how the hearth light seemed to bend toward the small circle where Rowan stood with the elders, his presence drawing attention without demanding it, and when he finally turned, the movement was subtle yet final, the kind that signaled a decision had been made, and he asked for everyone to gather, not with a roar or a raised voice, but with a tone that carried easily across the clearing, and people obeyed before realizing they were doing so, stepping closer, forming a loose ring that included Emily whether she wished it or not, and she felt the familiar instinct to retreat flare and fade at the same time, because the pup shifted against her chest and grounded her, reminding her why she was here, and Rowan spoke then, plainly, explaining that the pup had a name and a lineage, that it was his son, lost during a winter crossing and found not by trackers or guards, but by an Omega who had chosen compassion over convenience. And the words landed like snow, quiet and heavy, because titles rearranged reality, and Emily heard her name spoken aloud in front of everyone, not as an afterthought, but as the center of the story, and she felt heat rise to her face as eyes turned toward her, some wide with surprise, others clouded with regret, and Rowan continued, saying that strength was often loud and visible, but survival depended just as much on the quiet hands that fed the hungry and warmed the cold, that the pack would remember this, that he would remember this. And he thanked her again, publicly this time, not with flowery praise but with clear acknowledgement, and the elders bowed their heads, some reluctantly, some with relief, because a truth once spoken could not be unspoken, and Emily swallowed, unsure what to do with the weight of that moment, because gratitude had never been offered to her like this, not without strings, and Rowan did not place a mark or make a claim, did not elevate her with a gesture that would bind her future without consent. Instead, he offered her a cloak from his own shoulders, warm and well worn, saying simply that she should not stand cold while the pack stood warm, and the simplicity of it struck deeper than any ceremony could have, because it was an answer to every winter she had endured unnoticed, and when she accepted it, the murmurs shifted again, not in protest but recognition, and the pup chose that moment to wriggle free just enough to stumble toward Rowan, tail wagging, then turned back toward Emily as if uncertain which presence mattered more, and Rowan laughed softly, the sound rare and disarming, before scooping his son up and holding him with care, and he looked at Emily over the pup's head and said that what she had begun would not end tonight, that there would be questions and changes, that Pax did not shift overnight, but he would see to it that her path forward was not blocked by old judgments, and Emily nodded, overwhelmed yet steady, because for the first time she felt seen without being examined, valued without being measured, and as the gathering dispersed, conversations quieter now, more thoughtful, she stood beneath the stars wrapped in borrowed warmth, realizing that the story others had told about her was already unraveling, thread by thread, replaced by something truer, something she had written herself with a single choice made in the cold, and whatever tomorrow brought, it would begin with her name spoken differently, not as a weakness to be endured, but as a reminder of what a pack was meant to protect. Morning after the gathering arrived with a cautious calm, the kind that followed a night where too much truth had been spoken to be ignored, and Emily felt it as she stepped out into the clearing wrapped in Rowan's cloak. Its weight both comforting and unfamiliar, because nothing about her position felt the same anymore, and yet she was still herself, still careful with her steps, still attentive to the pup who now slept soundly beside the hearth under watchful eyes. And as she moved through the pack, she noticed small changes, an elder nodding in acknowledgement, a younger wolf stepping aside without being asked, gestures that would have gone unnoticed before but now carried meaning, and she did not mistake them for acceptance, not yet. But they were openings, and that mattered, and Rowan remained nearby throughout the morning, not hovering, not directing, simply present, answering questions when asked, redirecting others with a look rather than an order, allowing the pack to adjust without force. And when the elders convened again, he invited Emily to sit nearby, not at the center, not hidden at the edges, but included, and the discussions turned to winter planning, to food stores and patrols, to how a pack weathered scarcity without losing itself. And when the topic of omegas arose, careful and tentative, Rowan listened before speaking, then said quietly that any structure that survived by dismissing its most vulnerable members was already failing, that strength built on exclusion cracked first, and Emily watched faces shift as words sank in, because no one liked being told their traditions were flawed, but no one could deny the truth of a pup found starving within their borders. And later, when the meeting ended, Rowan found her again near the water troughs, asking if she had eaten, and she admitted she had not yet, habit hard to break, and he frowned slightly, motioning her toward the food line without ceremony, standing with her as bowls were filled, ensuring there was no hesitation this time. And Emily felt her throat tighten as a warm portion was placed in her hands, not extra, not symbolic, simply equal, and she ate slowly, savoring more than the taste, because equality was something she had only ever imagined. And afterward Rowan spoke to her about what would come next, about choices rather than demands, telling her she could remain with the pack under his protection, or travel with him to safer lands while winter tightened its grip, that either path would be honored. And Emily listened carefully, weighing possibilities she had never been allowed to consider before. And she surprised herself by saying she needed time, not because she feared him, but because she had learned the cost of decisions made in desperation. And Rowan nodded, respecting the answer without pressure, telling her she would have that time. And as the day wore on, the pack settled into a new rhythm, quieter, more deliberate, and Emily found herself helping where needed, mending nets, portioning supplies, her movements confident without arrogance. And when she caught sight of the pup toddling unsteadily toward her, she knelt automatically, laughing softly, as it tumbled into her lap. And Rowan watched from a short distance away, his expression thoughtful, because the bond forming there was not one he could command or undo. And he understood then that what Emily had given was not a single act of kindness, but a pattern of care the pack would feel long after winter passed. And as the sun dipped low again, casting long shadows across the snow, Emily realized that the future no longer felt like something she endured one day at a time, but something she could step into with her eyes open, guided not by fear of scarcity, but by the quiet strength she had always carried, finally recognized. The final evening before Rowan's departure settled gently over the pack, the sky clear and pale, stars emerging one by one as if taking their time, and Emily stood at the edge of the clearing watching the firelight flicker across familiar faces that now felt subtly changed, because recognition, once given, altered the shape of memory itself. And the pup played nearby under careful watch, stronger already, steadier on its feet, a living reminder of how quickly life responded to care. And when Rowan approached her, it was without ceremony, his steps unhurried, his attention focused fully on her. And he told her that he would be leaving at first light to return the pup to lands better suited for a royal child to grow, that the road ahead would be long but safe. And Emily nodded, having known this moment would come, feeling the ache of it settle in her chest alongside a quieter sense of rightness, because letting go was sometimes the final act of care, and Rowan thanked her again, not for finding his son this time, but for reminding him what kind of world he wanted that son to inherit, one where kindness was not treated as weakness. And she answered that she had only done what anyone should, though. She understood now how rare that choice could be. And when he offered her a place beside him, not as an obligation but an invitation, saying she could travel with them if she wished or remain with the pack under his protection, she took a long breath, feeling the weight of both paths, and she chose to stay, for now, explaining that she wanted to help the pack rebuild the way it saw itself. That leaving immediately would feel like abandoning something just beginning to heal, and Rowan accepted her decision without disappointment, saying that leadership sometimes meant knowing when to step back and let others grow. And before he left, he placed his hand briefly over hers, a gesture of respect rather than claim, and promised that the door between their worlds would remain open, that she would always be welcome where he ruled. And as the night deepened and the pack settled into rest, Emily sat near the hearth with the pup curled against her one last time, whispering goodbye not with sadness but gratitude. And when dawn finally arrived, crisp and bright, she stood with the others to watch Rowan depart, the pup safe in his arms, its head turning back toward her once as if to remember, and she lifted her hand in farewell, feeling a quiet certainty take root. As the figure disappeared into the trees, because she was no longer defined by what she lacked or what others said she was, but by what she chose to give, and as the pack turned back toward the work of the day, Emily wrapped Rowan's cloak more securely around her shoulders, not as a borrowed symbol, but as a reminder of the night everything changed, and she stepped forward into the clearing, ready to take her place, knowing that true strength did not roar or dominate, but endured, nurtured, and built a future one small, compassionate choice at a time.